So without much further ado, I'm going to introduce Hugh Moss, who's a Senior Education Advisor at Cambridge Assessment English, and he's going to talk to us about particularly the power of assessment and with the focus on here in Sub-Saharan Africa. So please give Hugh a warm welcome. Thank you.
Good morning, Your Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. As you've just heard, my name is Hugh Moss, and I'm a Senior Education Advisor from Cambridge Assessment English. And it's a great honour for me to be here today at Innovation Africa in Harare, representing several departments of the University of Cambridge. The subject of my presentation is how assessment can contribute to improving learning outcomes in Sub-Saharan Africa. And the choice of subject was prompted by reading the latest Global Education Monitoring Report produced by UNESCO, which starts off in its first paragraph by referring to a crisis in education. Crisis in the report is used to alert the international community to how far it is from achieving its education commitments, specifically those relating to United Nations Sustainable Development Goal 4, commenting that in several countries, children are unable to read even after several years of schooling. So that kind of relates to Patrick's presentation a moment ago. One of the main purposes of Sustainable Development Goal 4 was to shift the emphasis from quality, i.e. the number of children enrolling in schools, which was a feature of the Millennium Development Goals, to an emphasis on the quality and equity of education. The first target of Sustainable Development Goal 4 is to ensure that by 2030, all girls and boys complete free, equitable and quality primary and secondary education, leading to relevant and effective learning outcomes. The indicator of success is the proportion of children and young people in primary and secondary schools achieving at least a minimum level of proficiency in reading and mathematics. UNESCO proposed the administration of national-scale assessments. As I'm sure you're aware, there are already several international, regional, and national assessments being administered in Sub-Saharan Africa. In themselves, they do not necessarily lead to improved learning outcomes, although they are useful in providing data for monitoring and evaluation purposes. So it's a bit like going to the hospital for a test, for example, an X-ray. That won't necessarily make you better unless it's associated with the course of treatment. Indeed, an overemphasis on these types of assessments can actually lead to negative learning outcomes if too much attention is paid in the classroom to exam preparation at the expense of focusing on curriculum-related learning goals. And it can also put a lot of pressure on learners and teachers to perform and get good exam results. Before continuing, I'd just like to say a little bit about different types of assessment. I've just mentioned large-scale assessments, such as tests which take place periodically and which are intended to check what learning has taken place. And these type of tests are commonly referred to as summative assessment, which look back on students' learning. On the other hand, in the classroom, teachers give students tasks to complete to find out about their learning needs. And these are often referred to as formative assessment. Now, these are often seen as distinct and separate, but in fact, there is an overlap between the two types of assessment. So end-of-year tests can be used for formative purposes by identifying areas that students need to improve on in the future. I'll go on to focus on how these assessments can enhance learning outcomes, but before I do that, I'd just like to point out one of the main reasons that large-scale assessments may fail to help students learn, namely when they are divorced from the experience of the learner in the classroom and do not relate to learning objectives and the activities which go on in class. And my own memory of taking school exams, and I'm going back quite a way here, is that I didn't really have any idea of what questions were going to come up in the end-of-year tests. So I prepared as best as I could by looking back at my classroom notes and trying to remember what came up. And to my horror, on the day of the exam, when I opened the question paper, I found that the questions didn't bear any resemblance to what I'd been studying. And worse still, after a couple of weeks, I found that I'd forgotten most of the facts that I'd been trying to remember. I don't know if that experience is familiar to some of you too. I suspect it is. Well, now I'm going to play a short video clip for TED Talk. And the speaker's going to...
Here's the other...
Sorry, the speaker's going to focus on an aspect of how the value of assessments can be diminished. He's an American speaker. He's obviously very passionate about testing, as you'll see. And please just listen and watch the video and see the point that he's trying to make about assessment. So let's have a quick look.
Here's the other thing. I'm a tester guy. I believe you need data, you need information, because you work at something you think is working, and you find out it's not working, right? I mean, educators, you work, you say you think you got it, you're great. No, and you find out they didn't get it. But here's the problem with testing. The testing that we do, we're going to have our test in New York next week, right? It's in April. You know when we're going to get the results back? Maybe July, maybe June. And the results have great data. They'll tell you Raheem really struggled, couldn't do 2-digit multiplication, and it's so great data, but you're getting it back after school is over. And so what do? You go on vacation. You come back from vacation, now you've got all of this test data from last year. You don't look at it. Why would you look at it? You're going to go and teach this year. So how much money did we just spend on all of that? Billions and billions of dollars for data that it's too late to use it. I need that data in September. I need that data in November. I need to know you're struggling, and I need to know whether or not what I did corrected that. I need to know that this week. I don't need to know that at the end of the year when it's too late.
So, yeah, he's certainly passionate about testing, isn't he? And I think the point that he's trying to make is that exams can produce very important information, but they can result in an expensive lost opportunity if that data is not acted upon by educationalists and teachers to help learners improve in the classroom. So the solution is to ensure that large-scale tests relate to the experience of the learner in the classroom. That's where learning takes place, and that these assessments link to other forms of assessment, and in this way they'll complement each other and will promote student learning because they are focused on the learner. And the data derived from these assessments can be used to produce evidence of the learning that has taken place. Now I'd like to look at in a bit more detail how assessment and classroom activities can be brought together in a systemic way to enhance learning. And it's an area that Cambridge Assessment English has been working on for a number of years, and we've recently published a book on the subject, and I can give you details of that later on. And we call this systemic process of unifying learning and assessment, learning-oriented assessment, and sometimes it's also referred to as assessment for learning. And it's a systemic approach which unites the wider macro context, e.g. the Ministry of Education, who determine education policy, education objectives and goals, with a micro level at the centre, i.e. the classroom, where those objectives are met through teaching and learning. And it's validated by a series of assessment, including teacher-based tasks, school tests, and even external exams. Considering how learning-oriented assessment works in practice, at the macro level, curricular and learning objectives are set, linked to an external assessment if one is being used, and both are aligned to a framework of reference. In this case, on the left-hand side, you'll see the Common European Framework of Reference for Languages, used for mapping language ability from the basic A1 level to advanced C2. And other well-known frameworks include those produced by OECD for PISA, reading, science and mathematics, which describe the skills of students at different levels of proficiency. Associated with the frame of reference should be a measurement scale, which can then form the basis of a level system against which learners can be positioned according to their ability. And this enables their progress to be mapped, and they can be seen to progress up a learning ladder in that way. And we need to be able to do the same thing with tests, i.e. to link the tests and the tasks or questions in them to the measurement scale so that we set standards and we can ensure that the tests measure accurately and reliably from one version to another or one school year to the next. I should mention at this point that any test is only valid if it's fit for purpose and adapted to the local context. So if you want to measure reading skills in Zimbabwe, you need to design the test specifically to do that. So applying standards in a systematic way by assigning learners to levels on the framework enables everyone to better understand what it means to be at a particular level and can form the basis of objective comparison of performance between schools, between regions, and even between countries. As we know, learning takes place inside and outside the classroom. And at the micro level, tasks and activities are set by the teacher. Now, hopefully, these will be set according to the individual learning needs of the students in the class, because they all have different needs and they all have different abilities. So that's quite important, although it is a challenge. And then the learners will carry out those tasks or activities, and the teacher should observe or monitor the activities and provide feedback to the learners on their performance. And this relates back to what Patrick was saying about the need to focus on the individual learner and provide data which is learner-specific. Now this aids progress by helping learners to improve, and it empowers them by giving them the right type of guidance at the right time, and facilitates them moving on to the next stage of their development. Ideally, at this point, teachers should make an informal record of the student's performance for future reference. And then, based on the record of performance and the notes that they've collected, the teachers should then think about the next course of action. They might decide that things are going all right as they are, or they might identify specific learning needs of the students and set them new tasks to complete, maybe focusing on multiplication or subtraction in mathematics, or maybe punctuation and paragraphing in English. It could also mean adapting the immediate learning objectives to enhance learning outcomes. Again, leading to the setting of new tasks, and so the cycle continues. The learning cycle also takes place outside the classroom, with activities carried out online, followed up by feedback and the provision of further activities to help students improve in different areas. So that's an important aspect, and I'll speak about this a bit later on, the importance of extending learning outside the classroom. As well as informal records, the teacher may keep a more structured record of achievement. And for out-of-class activities, the record may be maintained and managed by electronic means, such as a learning management system. The record of learner achievement can then be interpreted against the frame of reference and contribute to the monitoring of progress against learning objectives. And this data is not only very valuable for learners and teachers, but is also a source of evidence to be used by policymakers to evaluate whether the education measures they've put in place are achieving the desired outcomes. Through the learning-oriented assessment cycle, it then becomes possible to monitor and evaluate each learner's performance at various stages, including by task and at regular intervals, And at the end of each term or the end of a school year, learners may also take formal progress tests or school exams which form part of the cycle. And learners, hopefully, who've made sufficient progress can then start preparing for the next level or academic year, and so they advance up the learning ladder. Now, in terms of implementing learning-oriented assessment, there are a number of stages to go through. And first of all, at the top level, a decision needs to be made, for example, by the Ministry of Education, whether to adopt the approach. If so, then they need to go on to set realistic goals, for example, relating to learning outcomes or bettering society and so on. And next, and very importantly, consideration should be given to ensuring the adoption of learning-oriented assessment is adequately resourced, taking on board the comments that Patrick made, and is coherent in its inception, encompassing all elements of the learning environment. So it needs to be a holistic approach for it to work effectively. And it should unite the micro and macro levels, resources, data collection, etc. And setting up the system will imply ensuring that all these elements are in place and supported by appropriate technology. Implementation will require teachers to be adequately trained and prepared to achieve the learning objectives in the curriculum. And it will be necessary to source suitable learning and teaching materials as well. And the system should be monitored over time to ensure it's working effectively and to make any changes where required. Impact studies should be produced to enable policymakers and other stakeholders to evaluate the success of the overall approach. Well, as with any new approach or system, implementing learning-oriented assessment is not without its challenges. So keeping comprehensive records and finding a good way of storing them can be time-consuming and labor-intensive. Ensuring the data is accurate can be tricky, as can interpreting the data. And a critical element of success is the teacher's level of preparedness, not only their willingness to adopt the approach, but also their ability to evaluate students' learning needs, set appropriate tasks for the learners, and also keep good records of their performance. And solutions to overcoming these challenges involve upskilling of teachers and professional development, and empowering students to take more control of their own learning, and importantly, making use of high-quality teaching and learning materials, i.e. published course books and teacher guides, such as Empower, produced by Cambridge English, and it's specifically based upon the learning assessment approach, and has links to online learning resources for teachers and students. Digital technology, including learning management systems, games, apps, and online resources are all really important in terms of the role they have in extending learning outside the classroom, and also enabling new forms of interaction to take place by connecting students in different schools and even across different countries. And it can also help learners by scaffolding their development, by supporting them. For example, Cambridge Assessment English has produced an online free-to-use tool to help students improve their writing. And it enables teachers and learners to choose from a wide variety of writing tasks. This is just a screenshot. It's a pity I couldn't show it live because it's really quite impressive. So on the left-hand side is the task that the student has been set to answer. It's about writing a report or making a video. And their response is underneath, beginning with, "My teacher has asked me to write a report." And on the right-hand side is the feedback that is being produced automatically by the online tool. And this feedback comes in a matter of seconds, so the student submits their response and they get instant feedback. And this feedback flags up some errors with the student's writing, for example, grammar, punctuation, and spelling. And it enables the student to have another go at attempting to do the task, carrying out self-correction. And so it's quite empowering because they can see their work improving instantly, because hopefully the second time they submit, there'll be fewer error corrections. And the next slide shows the teacher area of Write and Improve, which keeps a record of students' work and enables the progress to be seen by teachers. So this type of technology can be really helpful in facilitating the collection and storage of data and reducing the workload on the teacher. So in summary, learning-oriented assessment places learners at the center and helps individualize learning, empowering learners and facilitating lifelong learning by encouraging self-reflection and improvement, and thus helps make education sustainable. It integrates learning and different types of assessment, which provide valuable evidence of learning outcomes, enabling the success of teaching and education policies to be evaluated. By encouraging all forms of assessment to put learners at the center, learning-oriented assessment can help overcome the criticism often leveled at large-scale assessments, i.e. that they can lead to the shaping and governing of school systems by numbers. Where evidence from assessment highlights issues such as poor performance, it can act as a catalyst and provoke action by stakeholders such as school directors and education authorities. Learning-oriented assessment will invariably imply preparing teachers and developing them professionally. And in order to optimize learning opportunities and minimize administration, should make the best use of existing and emerging technologies. So thank you very much indeed for your attention. We have prepared a postcard which we'll distribute, which has a bit more information about learning-oriented assessment. But please, visitors at the Cambridge stand, or speak to me. I'm hoping to meet several of you over the next few days. I don't know if we've got time for any questions, John, or if we need to move on.
Yeah, well, I think we maybe one or two questions. Does anybody have any questions for Hugh? Please introduce yourself.
Thank you very much. I'm Abdul Koulibaly, Program Specialist Education in the Regional Office of UNESCO here in Harare. I would like to thank the presenter for guiding us through the assessment. Look at the title where we're talking about learning outcomes in Sub-Saharan Africa. Throughout the presentation, I was expecting at least a mentioning of some examples of what's going on in Sub-Saharan Africa. So maybe that's just something to bring to your attention.
Thank you for that observation. This is a relatively new approach, and we have been working on a number of projects around the world. Unfortunately, not in Sub-Saharan Africa, where we've implemented or been implementing this approach as part of an education reform program. But in Malaysia, we have been heavily involved with the Ministry of Education there in reforming their English language education across the state system. And we have been encouraging them to adopt a learning-oriented assessment approach. As yet, it's still a bit early to comment on how, on the outcomes of that intervention. But the early signs are that it is helping improve education outcomes. And we are convinced that this approach works. Even I was in Edinburgh at an event on Friday, and I happened to meet the head of a language department from a university in Halifax in Canada, and he commented how he has noticed a significant improvement in the English performance of the students using this approach. So there is evidence that it is helping, but I'm sorry that I wasn't specifically able to allude to an example in Sub-Saharan Africa. Thank you.
Please, thank you very much.